So you have a 2018 or newer Jeep JL Wrangler or 2020 or newer JT Gladiator equipped with a manual transmission. Situation that it is, the engine's running, your stick is in neutral, you're on flat level ground, clutch pedal is completely disengaged, and for the life of you, you just can't get it to go into first or reverse. It feels blocked. Or maybe in a situation you're completely disengaged, your foot is off the brake and you're on flat ground, pushing up against that block gear, you actually feel the vehicle slightly creep forward. Well, if this sounds like your situation, you could very well be dealing with a hydraulic clutch system issue. You hope that it is because it's very DIY friendly and a lot more affordable than having to remove the transmission entirely. So if you double check that you have fluid in your reservoir and you still have a firm pedal right here, that will pretty much rule out that it's the master cylinder, and you move on down to the slave cylinder. On mine, I actually observed that the slave cylinder had oil residue around it at the bell housing, which points that it might have a leaky seal. At 92,000 miles, it very well could need to be replaced. So if you want to learn how to change out your slave cylinder and then bleed the hydraulic system, this is the video for you. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Gator Overland Channel. I'm John, and welcome back to another episode of the Go Tech series, where I tell you everything you need to know about replacing a part, nothing you don't. That way you spend less time listening to me, more time changing out the part, and get yourself back on the road. But before we change anything out, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory about where we're at. So it's a 2020 Jeep Gladiator, manual transmission. I got 92,000 miles on the clock, and it's been probably one of the best vehicles I've owned. At about 62,000 miles, so about 30,000 miles ago, I upgraded to the ACT JP6 clutch with the ProMass flywheel. I actually did a review on that. I'll leave a link in the description below. But it has been nothing short of an incredible experience. It's the way that the actual clutch should have been from the get-go. But up until recently, around 3 weeks ago, I started to have some instances where I was trying to engage first or reverse at a stop and fully disengaged on the clutch, but it just feels blocked and it's not wanting to go in. Or I'll be in the situation where I'm trying to get it out of first or reverse, like in a 3-point turn, and it's just feeling like it's hung up. I almost have to pull it the same way that I would my four-wheel drive lever, and then it would come out. Or there's been some rare instances where I'll be sitting at a stoplight, completely disengaged, foot off the brake, about to put it into gear. It's feeling blocked, but in that instance where it's blocked, I actually notice the vehicle's creeping forward. Well, these are all instances of the clutch proving that it's not completely disengaging from the flywheel and it's still having some rotational force on the input shaft, keeping you from going in that gear. And this could be from a number of reasons. The high end is because it would be something requiring you to actually remove the transmission. We hope we don't have to go that far, but that would be because something of the clutch mechanism is either contaminated, it's got rust, grease, some kind of grime, or maybe even the input shaft has all the like, and it's just not allowing it to release freely. Or it could be associated with the hydraulics. Now, those are all prone to failure, at least at some point in time, and over a period of time, it could make it to where the clutch just is not completely disengaging because you have a leaky seal. So I popped the hood and I observed that my clutch reservoir, which is actually part of the brake fluid reservoir, did have fluid in it, but it was at basically the lowest margin that it could be. So I went ahead and filled that up, and then I observed the master cylinder, which is attached to your actual clutch pedal. Everything seemed clear there. It didn't have any oil on the firewall side or on the footwell side, and I still had a firm clutch feel. So that would tell me that the master cylinder, at least right now, is in good shape. If it felt spongy or was releasing towards the floor, it could be because you have air in the line, or the master cylinder is going out, or both because the master cylinder is going out. But because that's still feeling firm, that points me down to the slave cylinder. Slave cylinder is located on the driver's side, and you'll see the actual hoses go through, and it's a black apparatus that goes into the side of the bell housing. And what this does is it receives the hydraulic pressure when you're pushing down the pedal. It actually extends out a plunger, and it pushes on the clutch fork, which disengages the clutch from the flywheel. This has a leaky seal on it, which I observed actual leaky residue about where it actually connects, which gives me the idea that it's probably leaking at least at some point. It could actually fully extend and then bleed back, or just never develop the pressure enough to actually operate the clutch fork at all. So this is my first inclination that it probably needs to be replaced. So off to Facebook and all the forums to find any kind of information, because currently, 2025, there's not one video on YouTube showing how to replace or repair the JL, JT, slave, or master cylinder. So this is step one for a lot of people. But I did find that it wasn't an instance just associated with the ACT clutch. It also seen it with center force and factory clutches with not being able to get it into gear. So we're going to get this replaced. We're going to bleed the system. I'm going to show you how to do all that. If For your viewing convenience, this video is timestamped, allowing you to go to any point in this video without having to scroll through. Don't forget to check the description below, as I have links to websites and Amazon affiliate links for everything that I used today in this video, and contact information should you need to get a hold of me. Let's get started. Tools. Everything you see here is at least but not limited to what is required to replace and bleed your slave cylinder. You might even have some tools of your own to make the process go even easier. If you're planning on replacing your master cylinder or the both master and slave cylinder, you might need a few extra tools, but the bleeding process is going to be the same. We have our normal socket wrench here with a 13 and a 15 millimeter, and the same in the combo style wrenches here. You'll need a flathead or a pry bar to pry certain things. You may need a bungee or a tension strap like this. For lighting, I have a shop light, flashlight, and a headlight. You could use any of all of these. For your fluid, you'll need a brake fluid .3. This is a 32 ounce. I ended up getting 2 of these, but you probably only need 1, depending on how your bleeding process goes. I used a Mighty Vac. I got that at Harbor Freight for about 50 bucks. And you'll need a rubber stopper. This is actually a rubber bumper for the bottom of a chair leg. We have our cleanup stuff, just shop rag and some basin for maybe the shop fluids. And optional, if you decide to remove your drive shaft, you'll need a torque wrench capable of 81 foot-pounds. Step 1. Confirm the clutch fluid level is full. There are 2 separate chambers in the reservoir, and to fill the clutch side, you have to completely fill the brake side, and it slowly spills over the baffle into the clutch side. You can better observe this fluid level by shining a light down on top of the reservoir. Step 2. Dismounting the axle side of the drive shaft. This is optional, but will allow more room to access the slave cylinder. Mark a horizontal line on the flange connection to reference for reinstallation. Use a 15 millimeter socket to remove the 4 bolts holding the drive shaft to the axle flange. Loosening may require engaging 4-wheel drive lever to keep the drive shaft from rotating. Once the bolts are removed, you can pry the flanges apart with a flathead screwdriver or a pry bar. From there, you can affix the drive shaft to the upper control arm using a tension strap or bungee cord. Step 3. Using a 13 millimeter, remove the nut holding the hydraulic line grommet bracket to the side of the transmission to allow for more maneuverability during the slave cylinder removal. Step 4. Removing the slave cylinder. Using a 13 millimeter, remove the 2 nuts holding the slave cylinder to the transmission bell housing. After the nuts are removed, slowly guide the slave cylinder plunger directly back and out of the bore. Once I removed the original slave cylinder, I was surprised to see that the plunger boot was not covered with oil. Once I pulled the plunger boot over the retention ring, it was clear to see that the plunger and all the internals were covered with oil, showing that there was definitely a seal leak. Step 5. Replacing the slave cylinder. Have your new slave cylinder ready by using your thumbnail or a flathead to slide back the spring clip and remove the silicone plug, and place the new slave cylinder high up near the old slave cylinder. I rested mine on the upper control arm. Using your thumb or a flathead, slide back the spring clip holding the hydraulic line onto the old slave cylinder. To reduce the amount of oil loss when the line is removed, position the slave cylinder port connection upward as high as you can with the plunger facing down to the ground. The line should become out of the port with minimal effort, so slowly work it out, and before losing too much oil, quickly replace the line into the new slave cylinder port and close the spring clip. Step 6. The initial bleed and prime. First, double check your clutch fluid level and add as needed to be full. From under the vehicle, attach a length of 3/16 or 1/4 inch ID hose to the bleeder barb on the slave cylinder and the other end into a bottle or a vac bottle. Position the slave cylinder bleeder towards up and the plunger facing down. Open the bleeder slowly and compress the plunger to push out any air in the piston. While the plunger is compressed, do your best to close the bleed port and release the plunger. You should hear the fluid fill the slave cylinder. Repeat this process 5 times or until no air bubbles are observed and you feel a bit of resistance from the fluid in the plunger when compressing. Once this is complete, check your fluid level and add as needed to be full. Step 7. Reinstalling the slave cylinder. Take your slave cylinder and reposition the orientation to fit back into the bell housing bore. Before installing, take a moment to observe the clutch fork pocket set just a few inches inside the bore. It is crucial that the tip of the plunger rests inside the pocket. I found that once you get it in the bore, you can carefully probe around and feel it hit the pocket. It won't allow for leverage in any direction, and you'll have to compress it some to get the flange over the studs. If it slides onto the studs easily without compressing, you may need to reposition. Once you are confident you have the fork in the pocket, compress and refasten the nuts to 7 foot-pounds. If all is well, you should have pressure on the pedal down and back. If the pedal stays on the floor, you may have missed the fork pocket, and you'll need to remove the slave cylinder, reset the plunger into the pocket. Step 8. Slave cylinder bleed while installed. Now that your slave cylinder is installed, you should have pedal pressure down and up. Double check your fluid level and add as needed to be full. From under the vehicle, if removed, reinstall the hose on the bleeder barb and connect the Mighty Vac assembly. Pressure the Mighty Vac up to around 20 to 25 inches of vacuum and open the bleeder for a moment to observe any air bubbles that may be in the line. Be cautious if you're using 1/4-inch ID tubing. It will have a snug fit, but could still allow air bubbles to suck past the barb if you put it in a bind when turning the bleeder, and these bubbles are not to be confused with the air bubbles coming out of the bleeder. Cycle the pedal for firmness and repeat until only fluid comes out of the bleeder. Check your fluid level and add as needed to be full. Step 9. Alternate bleed method from the fluid reservoir. So we've confirmed that we no longer have any bubbles coming out of our bleeder, so that means that our slave is free of air, but I have a mostly firm pedal, but it's making a squishy sound, kind of like a squeaky toy going, which means there's probably air in between here and the master cylinder, which is located up above. Now, in the process of researching before doing this, I came across what's called dry vac bleeding, and it's a process that's approved by Ford and GM. Not necessarily find anything about Mopar doing it, but it ends up also being the method that Centerforce recommends for their master cylinder, slave cylinder full replacement. So I figured it might be something worth looking into. All it requires is a rubber stopper that's going to go in the place of your cap here. I found an old chair leg that had a hole in it, and used one of the little funnel tippets that came in the vacuum kit along with one of the connectors and the 1/4-inch hose. And we go ahead and put in there, make sure that the reservoir is full. You're gonna have to fill it all the way up, and then it goes over the baffle. Make sure that it's full in the process of this, and make sure that you don't have too much fluid in there so it's not pulling too much vacuum or any fluid into the line. Go ahead from there, crank up to no more than 15 inches of vacuum, and I left it overnight. You can do it as they recommend, every couple minutes or so, and checking back. I just left it, and the reason why you only want to do 10 to 15 inches of vacuum is as you release the clutch pedal, the clutch fork springs all push back up against this slave. Once you increase the vacuum, you could potentially pull this out of the clutch fork, and then when everything's released, it could bypass the clutch fork, potentially breaking this thing or just having to remove this thing altogether. So be mindful when doing this that is a potential. I left it overnight, came back, it was still at 15 inches, which also confirms that there's no leaks. Released this, put on the cap, made sure everything was all fluid full and everything, and my pedal was back to normal. All shifting operation has resumed, and it's been fantastic. Alternative method, you can consider it. So at this point, you've replaced your slave cylinder or other associated hydraulic component, you bled your line, and you now have a firm pedal back and forth. You can go ahead and reconnect your drive shaft. Just make sure you line up those two lines and torque down those bolts to 81 foot-pounds. From there, you can go for a test drive and double check that all your release of the clutch pedal, you should be at about 30 to 40% release on your engagement and disengagement. If it's releasing and engaging way down towards the floor, you may still have air in your system, or you might have another associated component that you might need to replace, or the both. But if it ends up being a situation where you're still having the lockout in first or reverse, it might be telling that you still have an issue with your release on the clutch, and you might need to bring it in for further investigation, which at worst, you have to separate both the transmission and the clutch to evaluate. I hope it doesn't go that far, but at this point, I have about 600 miles since we replaced everything. I haven't had any issues, and I'm still showing no signs of leaking down in the slave cylinder area. So I think we solved the problem for this vehicle, and I hope it works out for you. Well, that about wraps things up. If you enjoyed today's video, found it informative or helpful in assessing, replacing, and bleeding your clutch hydraulic system and getting your shifter back to where it needs to be, go ahead, give us a big thumbs up. Let us know how we're doing. Share if you'd like, I'd appreciate that. For a heads up on any future installs or adventures, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, notification bell, and you can follow us along our journey. Don't forget to check the description below, as I'll have links to websites as well as Amazon affiliate links for products and replacement parts you've seen today, as well as contact information should you need to get a hold of me. Remember, we at Gator Overland encourage each and every one of you to take a daily moment to unplug and reconnect with the outdoors, even if it's just for a few minutes. Have fun, keep it safe, and just go. Thanks, y'all.